Picture this. You're walking through a jungle in Costa Rica when suddenly you stumble upon something that makes your jaw drop. A massive stone ball, perfectly round, sitting there like someone just rolled it off a cosmic pool table. But here's the crazy part. It's been there for over 1,000 years, and nobody knows how ancient people made it so perfectly round without modern tools. These aren't just rocks someone found and thought looked cool. We're talking about over 300 stone spheres scattered across Costa Rica, some weighing as much as a car, others small enough to hold in your hands. And get this, they're so mathematically perfect that even today's engineers scratch their heads wondering how it was done. But the real mystery isn't just how they made them. It's why. What were these ancient people thinking? Were they markers for something? Religious symbols? Ancient GPS systems? Or something even weirder that we haven't figured out yet? Today we're diving deep into one of archaeology's most mind-bending puzzles. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be looking at rocks in a completely different way. Let's go back to the 1930s. Costa Rica is basically the Wild West of Central America, and the United Fruit Company is clearing massive chunks of jungle to plant banana trees. Workers are out there with machetes and bulldozers, just going to town on the rainforest. Then bam! Their machines hit something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. At first, the workers probably thought they'd found some kind of natural rock formation. But as they cleared more jungle, they kept finding more of these things. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. And these weren't your typical rocks. These were perfectly spherical stone balls, some tiny like marbles, others absolutely massive. We're talking 8 feet across and weighing over 15 tons. That's heavier than 3 cars stacked on top of each other. The banana workers didn't know what to make of these things. Some of them actually thought there might be gold inside, so they started blowing them up with dynamite. Yeah, you heard that right. They were literally exploding priceless archaeological artifacts because they thought they were piñatas full of treasure. Thankfully, word got out to the scientific community before too many got destroyed. By the 1940s, archaeologists started showing up, and what they found blew their minds. These weren't just random rocks. They were clearly man-made, crafted with incredible precision by people who lived there centuries before Europeans ever set foot in the Americas. The more scientists studied them, the more questions they had. How do you carve a perfect sphere out of solid rock using Stone Age tools? We're not talking about pretty round here. Some of these spheres are accurate to within a few millimeters. That's the kind of precision you'd expect from a modern factory, not from people working with stone hammers and chisels. But here's where it gets really interesting. These spheres weren't just scattered randomly through the jungle. They were arranged in specific patterns, lines, triangles, and other geometric shapes that clearly meant something to whoever put them there. Some were found on hilltops, others in river valleys. Some were grouped together like they were having a stone sphere convention, while others stood alone like ancient sentinels guarding the jungle. The local people, the descendants of whoever made these things, had stories about them. They called them Los Bolas, just the balls. And they had legends about gods who threw them down from the sky, or about thunder beings who left them behind after great battles. But legends are one thing. Hard science is another. And when archaeologists started dating the sites where these spheres were found, they discovered something incredible. These things were old. Really old. Some of them were made over 1,500 years ago, during what scientists call the Cherokee period. Think about that for a second. While Europeans were still figuring out how to build decent castles, people in Costa Rica were creating geometric art that looks like it came from a modern sculpture garden. The discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Here was proof that pre-Columbian civilizations in Central America were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. These weren't simple hunter-gatherer societies. These were people with advanced mathematical knowledge, incredible artistic skills, and the organizational power to create massive public works projects. But the biggest shock was still coming. As scientists studied more of these spheres, they realized something that completely changed how we think about ancient American civilizations. These perfect stone balls weren't unique to Costa Rica. Similar spheres started turning up in other parts of Central and South America. And not just a few. We're talking about thousands of them. Suddenly, archaeologists weren't just dealing with a local mystery. They were looking at evidence of a widespread cultural phenomenon that stretched across multiple countries and lasted for centuries. Whatever these spheres represented, it was big enough and important enough that entire civilizations dedicated massive amounts of time and resources to creating them. And that's when the real questions started. Because if you're going to spend months or years carving a perfect sphere out of solid rock, you better have a really good reason. These weren't just decorations. They meant something. But what? Okay, let's talk about just how mind-blowing these spheres really are. When I say they're perfect, I'm not exaggerating. We're talking about a level of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. Scientists have measured these things with laser scanners, the same technology we use to measure parts for spacecraft. And you know what they found? Some of these spheres are accurate to within 2 millimeters across their entire surface. 2 millimeters. That's about the thickness of a coin. But here's the kicker. They did this without any of the tools we'd use today. No laser levels, no computer-controlled machines, no precision measuring devices. Just stone tools, human hands, and somehow, an understanding of geometry that rivals modern engineering. So how did they do it? Well, scientists have been trying to figure that out for decades, and they've come up with some pretty incredible theories. First, let's talk about the raw materials. These spheres are carved from different types of rock, but most of them are made from something called gabbro, a super hard volcanic rock that's tough as nails. We're talking about stone that's almost as hard as granite. Try carving a perfect sphere out of granite with stone tools and see how that goes for you. The process probably started with finding the right boulder. Not just any rock would do. They needed something that was already roughly the right size and shape, without major cracks or flaws that would mess up the final product. Then comes the rough shaping. Scientists think they used a technique called pecking, where you basically hammer the rock with another harder rock, chipping away tiny pieces bit by bit. Imagine doing that for months, slowly turning a rough boulder into something that's vaguely sphere-shaped. But here's where it gets really wild. How do you know when you've got a perfect sphere? Today, we'd use computer models and laser measurements. But these ancient craftspeople figured out something genius. They probably used what's called the string and peg method. Picture this. You stick a peg in the ground, tie a string to it, and use that to draw a perfect circle. Now imagine doing that in 3 dimensions, constantly checking that every point on your sphere is exactly the same distance from the center. But that's not even the most impressive part. Some of these spheres show evidence of different finishing techniques. The smaller ones are polished to a mirror-like shine, while the bigger ones have different surface textures that probably served different purposes. And get this, they figured out how to transport these things. We're talking about moving 15-ton stone balls through dense jungle, across rivers, and up hillsides, all without wheels, cranes, or any of the equipment we'd use today. Scientists think they used a combination of log rollers and ramps, plus probably hundreds of people working together. But even with all that manpower, moving something that heavy across rough terrain is no joke. These people were serious engineers. But wait, there's more. The really small spheres, the ones you could hold in your hand, are actually harder to make perfectly round than the big ones. When you're working on something massive, small imperfections don't show up as much. But when you're making something the size of a baseball, every tiny mistake is obvious. Yet somehow they nailed it. Even the smallest spheres are geometrically perfect. Now, here's something that'll blow your mind. Some scientists think these ancient craftspeople understood mathematical concepts that weren't, officially, discovered by European mathematicians until much later. We're talking about things like the golden ratio and advanced geometric principles. There's evidence that some of the sphere arrangements follow sophisticated mathematical patterns. Not just random placement, but carefully calculated positions that create specific geometric relationships between the spheres. And here's another crazy detail. They seem to have had different models or sizes that they made repeatedly. It's not like each sphere was completely unique. There are specific size categories that show up over and over again, like they were following some kind of standardized manufacturing process. Think about what that means. This wasn't just some random art project. This was an organized, systematic effort that probably involved specialized craftspeople, standardized techniques, and quality control that would make modern manufacturers proud. But perhaps the most mind-bending aspect is the sheer number of them. Over 300 spheres have been found so far, and scientists think there are probably many more still buried in the jungle. Creating that many perfect spheres would have required a massive investment of time, labor, and resources. We're not talking about a weekend hobby project. This was a major undertaking that probably took generations to complete. Entire communities would have been involved, from the people who found and quarried the stone, to the master craftspeople who did the carving, to the teams that transported and positioned the finished spheres. And they kept doing it for centuries. This wasn't just a short-lived cultural fad. Generation after generation continued the tradition, refining the techniques and creating new spheres long after the original creators were gone. Whatever these spheres represented, it was important enough to become a defining characteristic of their entire civilization. And that brings us to the biggest mystery of all. What were they actually for? Alright, buckle up because we're about to dive into some theories that range from brilliant to absolutely bonkers. Scientists, archaeologists, and yes, even some conspiracy theorists have all taken their shot at explaining what these perfect stone spheres were actually for. Let's start with the most practical theory. They were status symbols. Think about it like this. If you lived in an ancient society and you wanted everyone to know how important and powerful you were, what would you do? You'd commission something that was obviously expensive and difficult to make. Creating a perfect stone sphere would have required master craftspeople, tons of workers, and months or years of labor. Only the richest and most powerful people could afford something like that. So maybe these spheres were like ancient luxury cars, a way for chiefs and nobles to show off their wealth and status. This makes sense when you look at where some of the spheres were found. Many of them were located near what archaeologists think were important buildings or ceremonial sites. It's like putting a Ferrari in your driveway. Everyone who walks by knows you've got money. But here's where it gets more interesting. Some scientists think these spheres were actually ancient astronomical tools. Bear with me on this one, because it's pretty mind-blowing. The idea is that the positions of the spheres might correspond to stars, constellations, or other celestial objects. Ancient people were way more connected to the night sky than we are today. They used the stars for navigation, to track seasons for farming, and for religious ceremonies. What if these stone spheres were like a giant three-dimensional star map? The different sizes could represent different brightness levels of stars, and their positions on the ground could mirror the positions of constellations in the sky. There's actually some evidence for this. Some of the sphere arrangements do seem to match certain star patterns, and many ancient civilizations created earthworks that were aligned with astronomical events. But wait, it gets even wilder. Some researchers think the spheres might have been used as surveying tools, like ancient GPS markers that helped people navigate through the jungle. Here's how this would work. If you place perfect spheres at specific locations and you know the exact distances between them, you can use them to create incredibly accurate maps. The spheres would serve as fixed reference points that surveyors could use to measure distances and directions across large areas. This isn't as crazy as it sounds. Ancient civilizations were surprisingly good at surveying and mapping. The Romans built roads that ran perfectly straight for hundreds of miles, and the ancient Egyptians could orient their pyramids to true north with incredible precision. Maybe these Central American civilizations developed their own surveying system using stone spheres as markers. It would explain why the spheres are so perfectly round. Any imperfections would throw off the measurements. Now let's talk about the religious theories, because this is where things get really fascinating. Many archaeologists think the spheres had deep spiritual significance for the people who made them. In many cultures around the world, the sphere or circle represents perfection, completion, and the divine. Think about halos in religious art, or the way we use phrases like, coming full circle. There's something about that perfect round shape that humans seem to find spiritually meaningful. Maybe these stone spheres represented the sun, the moon, or other celestial bodies that were worshipped as gods. Or they could have been physical representations of abstract concepts like eternity, perfection, or the cycle of life and death. Some of the spheres were found in what are clearly ceremonial contexts, arranged in patterns around plazas or placed at the entrances to important buildings. This suggests they played a role in religious rituals or ceremonies. But here's a theory that'll really get your imagination going. What if the spheres were actually ancient computers? Now, before you roll your eyes, hear me out. We know that ancient civilizations created mechanical devices that could perform complex calculations. The ancient Greeks had the Antikythera mechanism, which was basically an analog computer that could predict eclipses and track planetary movements. What if these stone spheres were part of a similar system? Maybe they were arranged in patterns that allowed people to perform calculations related to astronomy, agriculture, or engineering. The spheres could have been moved around like pieces on a giant game board, with different positions representing different variables in mathematical equations. It sounds far-fetched, but when you consider how mathematically sophisticated these people were, it's not impossible. And then there are the theories that venture into truly speculative territory. Some people think the spheres were landing markers for ancient aircraft, or that they were created by visitors from other planets who wanted to leave a calling card. These ideas might sound ridiculous, but they persist because the perfection of these spheres is just so hard to explain using conventional archaeology. When people can't understand how something was made, they sometimes jump to extraordinary explanations. Of course, there's also the possibility that we're overthinking this. Maybe the spheres were just art, beautiful objects created by master craftspeople who wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible with stone carving. Art doesn't always have to have a practical purpose. Sometimes people create things simply because they're beautiful, or because the act of creating them is meaningful in itself. But here's what makes this mystery so compelling. It's probably not just one thing. These spheres were created over centuries by different communities, and they might have served different purposes at different times. Some might have been status symbols, others astronomical tools, and still others religious artifacts. The meaning and purpose might have evolved over time as cultures changed and new generations inherited these mysterious stone balls. What we do know is that whatever these spheres represented, it was important enough that people kept making them for hundreds of years. That kind of cultural continuity doesn't happen by accident. It means these objects held deep significance for the societies that created them. Just when you thought this mystery couldn't get any weirder, modern technology started revealing secrets that nobody saw coming. We're talking about discoveries made in just the last few years that have completely changed how scientists think about these stone spheres. First up, let's talk about what ground-penetrating radar revealed. You know that technology they use to find buried treasure and ancient ruins without digging? Well, scientists started using it around the known sphere sites in Costa Rica, and what they found made their jaws drop. There are way more spheres down there. We're not talking about a few extras. We're talking about potentially hundreds more spheres buried under centuries of jungle growth and sediment. Sites that were thought to have just a handful of spheres actually have dozens of them arranged in complex patterns underground. But here's the really wild part. Some of these buried spheres are arranged in geometric patterns that are only visible when you look at the complete underground layout. It's like discovering that what you thought was a single painting is actually just one corner of a massive mural. One site revealed spheres arranged in what looks like a giant spiral pattern extending deep into the jungle. Another showed spheres positioned at the points of perfect triangles and squares, creating geometric relationships that would have been impossible to see from ground level when they were made. This means the ancient creators weren't just making individual spheres. They were creating massive landscape-scale artworks that could only be fully appreciated from above. But here's the crazy question. How did they know what the patterns looked like if they couldn't see them from the air? And speaking of seeing from above, satellite imaging has revealed something even more mind-blowing. When you look at the sphere sites from space, some of them appear to be aligned with geographical features like mountain peaks, river bends, and valley openings across distances of dozens of miles. It's like the entire landscape was their canvas, and the stone spheres were just part of a much larger design that incorporated natural features across vast areas. We're talking about a level of landscape planning that would challenge modern urban designers. But the technological revelations don't stop there. 3D scanning technology has allowed scientists to create incredibly detailed digital models of the spheres, and what they've discovered is absolutely fascinating. Some spheres that look perfectly smooth to the naked eye actually have tiny, almost invisible markings carved into their surfaces. These markings are so subtle that they were completely missed by earlier researchers, but modern scanning technology can detect variations in the surface that are smaller than the width of a human hair. Nobody knows what these micromarkings mean yet, but they're clearly intentional. Some form patterns that might be decorative, while others look almost like they could be some kind of writing system or symbolic notation. And here's something that'll give you chills. Some of these microscopic markings are identical across different spheres found miles apart from each other. This suggests an incredibly sophisticated system of standardization and quality control that we're only now beginning to understand. Recent chemical analysis has also revealed some shocking things about where the materials came from. Remember how these spheres are made from super hard volcanic rock? Well, it turns out that some of the stone came from quarries that are hundreds of miles away from where the finished spheres were found. Think about what that means. These ancient people were operating supply chains that spanned entire countries. They were identifying the best quality stone from distant locations, somehow transporting multi-ton boulders across mountain ranges and through jungles, and then finishing them into perfect spheres at their final destinations. This wasn't a local cottage industry. This was an organized operation that probably involved trade networks, specialized transportation crews, and coordination between communities across vast distances. But perhaps the most exciting recent discovery comes from new dating techniques that are way more precise than anything scientists had before. And what they've found is rewriting the timeline of when these spheres were created. Some of the spheres are even older than anyone thought. We're talking about potentially 2,000 years old or more. But here's the really interesting part. The sphere-making tradition didn't just last for a few generations. It continued for over 1,000 years, with different styles and techniques evolving over time. Scientists can now identify different periods of sphere creation, each with its own characteristics and innovations. It's like being able to track the evolution of an art form across centuries, seeing how each generation of craftspeople built on the knowledge of their predecessors. And here's something that might change everything. Recent excavations have uncovered what appear to be workshop sites where the spheres were actually made. These aren't just random tool scatters. We're talking about organized manufacturing facilities with evidence of specialized tools, work areas, and even what might be quality control stations. At one site, archaeologists found partially completed spheres in various stages of production, along with the stone tools used to shape them and evidence of the techniques used to achieve such perfect roundness. It's like discovering an ancient factory that's been preserved for over 1,000 years. But the most mind-blowing recent discovery might be the evidence of sphere repair and maintenance. That's right, these ancient people didn't just make the spheres and abandon them. They maintained them over time, repairing damage and even modifying some spheres centuries after they were originally created. This suggests that these objects remained important and actively used for generations after their creation. Whatever purpose they served, it wasn't just ceremonial or decorative. These were functional objects that played an ongoing role in people's lives. Recent studies have also revealed evidence of different specialist roles in sphere creation. There were people who specialized in selecting the raw materials, others who did the rough shaping, and master craftspeople who did the final precision work. It was like an ancient assembly line, but for creating perfect stone art. And here's the discovery that ties everything together. Some of the recently excavated sites show clear evidence that the spheres were moved and repositioned multiple times throughout their history. The patterns we see today aren't necessarily the original arrangements. They represent centuries of modification and repositioning as different generations use these objects for their own purposes. This means that the mystery of the stone spheres isn't just about figuring out what they were originally for. It's about understanding how their meaning and use evolved over more than a millennium of continuous cultural development. The more we learn, the more complex and sophisticated this ancient civilization appears to be. These weren't simple Stone Age people making crude art. These were highly organized societies with advanced technical knowledge, complex trade networks, and cultural traditions that lasted longer than most modern countries have existed. So there you have it, the incredible mystery of Costa Rica's perfect stone spheres. After decades of research and cutting-edge technology, we know more about these amazing objects than ever before. But in many ways, the mystery has only gotten deeper. We've discovered that these weren't just random art projects, but part of a sophisticated civilization that operated complex trade networks, developed advanced mathematical knowledge, and maintained cultural traditions for over 1,000 years. These people were creating landscape-scale artworks and precision engineering projects that would challenge us even today. But the biggest questions still remain unanswered. Why did they make them? What did they mean to the people who created them? And how did an ancient civilization develop techniques for creating perfect spheres that we're only now beginning to understand? Maybe that's what makes this mystery so compelling. In our age of satellites and supercomputers, there are still things in this world that can make us scratch our heads and wonder. These stone spheres remind us that human creativity and ingenuity have been around a lot longer than our modern technology. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to finally crack the code and solve the mystery of the stone spheres. Maybe there's a piece of evidence out there waiting to be discovered, or a new way of looking at the existing clues that will finally reveal what these incredible objects were really for. Until then, these perfect stone balls will keep sitting in the jungles of Costa Rica, silent witnesses to a lost civilization's incredible achievements, holding their secrets and making us wonder what other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered. If this video blew your mind like it did mine, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible mysteries from around the world. And drop a comment below. What do you think these stone spheres were really for? I read every single comment, and some of your theories might be more mind-blowing than anything the scientists have come up with. Also, if you're hungry for more ancient mysteries, check out my video about the Nazca lines. Another incredible example of ancient people creating massive artworks that we're still trying to understand. Trust me, it's just as mind-bending as this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, the world is full of incredible mysteries just waiting for someone curious enough to dig deeper. Maybe that someone is you.